The truth no one admits is this. In some families, blame is not a reaction, it is an assignment. It's decided long before you speak, long before you explain, sometimes before you even walk into the room. You know this feeling intimately. The tight pause when something goes wrong. The way eyes drift toward you without accusation, because accusation isn't necessary anymore. You start apologizing before you know what happened. You replay conversations at night, searching for the invisible crime you must have committed again. But here is the question that never leaves you alone. How did you become the problem in a story you barely had a voice in? Why does responsibility cling to you, even when silence was your only action? This is not about fixing anything. It's about understanding the role you were quietly trained to carry and what it has been doing to you ever since. No one sits you down and explains it. There is no announcement, no formal decision. One day, something goes wrong in the family and somehow, it lands on you. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly enough that everyone pretends it happened naturally. At first, it feels coincidental, a misunderstanding, a bad day. You tell yourself you're being sensitive, but patterns do not need permission to repeat. Over time, you notice how tension eases when the focus shifts toward you. Arguments dissolve the moment your name enters the conversation. Relief moves through the room not because the problem is solved, but because it has found a place to live. That place becomes you. The family scapegoat is rarely the most rebellious or aggressive. Often, they are the most emotionally available, the one who notices moods, the one who feels the undercurrents before anyone speaks about them. Systems under stress instinctively offload discomfort onto whoever can carry it without exploding. You didn't choose the role you were chosen because you could endure it. Slowly, blame stops feeling like an event and starts feeling like gravity. You adjust your posture around it. You speak more carefully. You preemptively confess to things you don't fully understand, just to keep the peace. There's a specific humiliation in apologizing without knowing what you're apologizing for. But you do it anyway, because silence feels more dangerous than guilt. What makes this role especially disorienting is that it comes wrapped in moral language. Responsibility, maturity, being the bigger person. You are praised for absorbing what others refuse to look at. And because praise exists, you don't recognize the harm. You mistake endurance for virtue. You mistake survival for character. But something inside you begins to shrink. Not loudly, quietly. A contraction you feel when your perspective is dismissed before it's spoken. A hesitation before expressing needs. A sense that your presence itself creates problems. This is the unchosen role, becoming the emotional landfill for what a family cannot metabolize. And once assigned, it doesn't end when the room empties. It follows you inward, teaching you to monitor yourself, doubt yourself, and brace for blame even when you are completely alone. The origin of the scapegoat role is rarely dramatic. It does not begin with cruelty so obvious it can be named. It begins in moments so ordinary they disappear as they happen. A parent overwhelmed, a household stretched thin, an emotion with nowhere to go. Families, like nervous systems, look for regulation. When stress rises and conflict feels too dangerous to confront directly, it has to move somewhere. Into silence, into distraction, into a person. And unconsciously, the family learns who can hold that weight without breaking the surface. Often, it starts early. You sense a shift in the air before anyone speaks. You learn when to stay quiet, when to step forward, when to absorb tension, just by being present. Maybe you asked the wrong question at the wrong time. Maybe you expressed a feeling that didn't fit the family's rhythm. Maybe you simply noticed too much. Whatever the spark was, it mattered less than what followed. What followed was repetition. Each time blame settled on you, something subtle was reinforced. Conflict resolves faster when you are the problem. Not because you caused it, but because naming you as the cause keeps deeper fractures untouched. You became the emotional shortcut, the pressure valve, the place's complexity went to die. This is how roles harden, not through intention, but through relief. Every system repeats what reduces discomfort in the short term, even if it creates damage in the long term. Over time, your reactions began to shape themselves around this expectation. You apologized quickly. You explained yourself excessively. You learned to scan faces for danger before danger was named. And somewhere along the way, the story rewrote itself. What began as circumstance started to feel like identity. You weren't treated as the problem, you became it. At least, That's how it felt from the inside. What makes this especially painful is the absence of a clear villain. No single moment you can point to, no obvious betrayal, just a slow conditioning that taught you this truth without words. Harmony matters more than your clarity. Peace matters more than your innocence. This is where the pattern was born, not in malice, but in avoidance. And once avoidance finds a host, it rarely leaves on its own. When blame repeats long enough, it stops arriving from the outside. It begins to generate itself. This is not a metaphor, it is a neurological adaptation. The brain, exposed to consistent accusation without resolution, learns to anticipate fault as a form of self-protection. Your nervous system starts scanning for error, the way others scan for danger. A raised eyebrow, a pause in conversation, a sigh across the room, each becomes data. Before anyone speaks, your body is already responding. Shoulders tighten, breath shortens. A quiet calculation begins. What did I do wrong this time? Psychologically, this is how responsibility mutates into hyper-responsibility. You are no longer accountable only for your actions, but for outcomes, moods, and atmospheres. If someone is upset, your mind searches backward for a cause and lands on you by default. Not because evidence exists, but because history has trained that reflex. Over time, the brain links safety to self-blame. Guilt feels active, productive. It gives the illusion of control. If everything is your fault, then theoretically, everything can be prevented. This belief is exhausting, but it feels safer than the alternative, which is accepting that chaos existed long before you noticed it. There is also a deeper erosion happening. Repeated blame interferes with self-trust. When your internal narrative is constantly overridden, you stop relying on your own perception. Memory becomes suspect. Feelings feel exaggerated. Needs feel inconvenient. You start asking others to confirm what you're allowed to feel before you feel it. This is why internalized blame doesn't feel dramatic. It feels reasonable, mature, even ethical. You tell yourself you are being reflective, accountable, fair, but beneath that language is a quieter truth. You are policing yourself so no one else has to. And the cost is not just emotional, it is existential. When fault becomes your default position, innocence becomes unreachable. Rest feels undeserved. Joy feels conditional. Even silence carries an undertone of waiting. This is the science of the ache, a system trained to turn conflict inward until self-criticism feels like common sense. And once blame lives inside you, it no longer needs a family to survive. There is a moment when blame stops being something you endure and becomes something you enforce. By then, no one has to accuse you anymore. You do it automatically, efficiently, without witnesses. The conflict that once lived in the room relocates into your body. Anger is the first casualty of this war, not because it disappears, but because it becomes unsafe to feel. Anger would imply injustice. It would suggest you were wronged, and that idea threatens the role you learned to survive in. So the anger is rerouted, pressed down, thinned out, renamed. It becomes guilt. It is a shame. It becomes a low-grade exhaustion you can never quite sleep off. Inside, two forces collide. One part of you knows something is wrong. It flares up in sudden irritation, in fantasies of being understood, in moments when you want to shout, "I didn't do this." The other part shuts it down immediately, reminding you to stay calm, stay reasonable, stay good. This is not peace. This is an occupation. The war shows up in small, invisible ways. Over-explaining simple choices, rehearsing conversations that already happened, feeling defensive even when no one is attacking you, apologizing for your tone when you haven't raised your voice. These are not personality quirks. They are battle scars from a conflict that never had a ceasefire. What makes this especially painful is how moral it feels. You pride yourself on self-awareness, on empathy, on being able to see all sides. But empathy, when turned inward without protection, becomes self-betrayal. You give everyone the benefit of the doubt except yourself. And so the war continues quietly, not with explosions but with erosion, a slow wearing down of certainty, desire, and self-permission. You function, you adapt, you look fine. But inside, something is always bracing, waiting for the next accusation, even when the room is empty. The first crack does not feel like freedom. It feels like confusion. A moment when the story you've lived inside for years suddenly loses its weight, not enough to fall apart, but enough to wobble. It might happen during an argument that doesn't resolve the way it's supposed to. You accept blame, like you always do, and the tension doesn't lift. Or someone else is clearly at fault, and for the first time, you notice how quickly eyes still turn toward you. The reflex reveals itself, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. This is the moment when personal failure starts to look like a pattern. At first, you resist the realization. Seeing the role threatens the logic that kept you safe. If it wasn't your fault, then all that self-control, all that self-blame, all that quiet endurance, what was it for? The mind would rather cling to guilt than face the grief of having carried something unnecessary. But the crack widens anyway. You begin to feel a strange dissonance between what you do and what you're accused of. You notice how often explanations are dismissed before they're finished, how apologies are accepted but understanding never arrives. The rules were never designed for fairness, only for balance, and balance was achieved by keeping weight on you. This is not a dramatic rebellion. There are no speeches, no confrontations. The shift is internal and almost imperceptible. A pause before apologizing. A thought that surfaces and scares you. What if this isn't mine? That thought doesn't bring relief. It brings vertigo. Because if the blame was assigned, then the self you built around carrying it becomes unstable. Identity trembles when its foundation cracks. Still, something irreversible has happened. The role is no longer invisible. And once you see it as a role, not a truth, you begin, slowly and quietly, to loosen your grip. Stepping out of the scapegoat role does not begin with confrontation. It begins with restraint. The restraint to not rush in and carry what is familiar. The restraint to let silence exist where you once filled it with explanations, apologies, or self-correction. At first, this feels wrong, dangerous. Your body interprets it as negligence. You notice the urge immediately, the pull to fix the mood, soften the moment, take responsibility just to restore equilibrium. This reflex was trained over years, and unlearning it feels like disobedience. Like letting something break that you were taught to hold together at all costs. When you stop absorbing blame automatically, the system reacts. Confusion surfaces, sometimes irritation, sometimes subtle accusations disguised as concern. You may be told you're changing, becoming distant, difficult, less understanding. What's actually happening is simpler and more unsettling. The role is no longer being performed. This stage is lonely, not because you are doing something wrong, but because roles create belonging, even when they harm you. When you step out, you are no longer predictable, and predictability was how the family stayed regulated. Without it, discomfort floats closer to the surface, and you feel tempted to rescue everyone from it. Here is the quiet shift. You start noticing where responsibility ends. You begin to differentiate between impact and intent, between empathy and self-erasure. You let misunderstandings exist without immediately correcting them. You allow people to feel disappointed without rushing to repair their emotions. This is not cruelty. It is clear. The fear does not vanish. You still feel the echo of blame in your chest, but alongside it grows something unfamiliar and fragile. Permission. Permission to not be the container. Permission to exist without constant defense. Stepping out is not dramatic. It is subtle, repetitive, often invisible to everyone but you. And yet, it changes the entire shape of your inner life. Even after you step out of the role, it does not vanish cleanly. Roles that shaped survival do not dissolve on command. They leave an echo soft, persistent, and strangely intimate. You hear it in moments of quiet, when no one is accusing you, yet your body still prepares its defense. The echo shows up as hesitation, as a reflexive self-check before speaking, as a subtle tightening when conflict arises, even if it has nothing to do with you. You may notice how quickly your mind still reaches for responsibility, how familiar guilt feels compared to the uncertainty of neutrality. This is not failure. It is residue. Awareness does not erase conditioning, it reframes it. You begin to recognize the echo as memory rather than truth, a nervous system replay, not a present danger. And that recognition matters more than eliminating the sensation itself. It allows you to pause instead of comply, to feel the pull without obeying it. What changes now is your relationship to the echo. You stop arguing with it. You stop proving it wrong. You let it pass through without letting it decide who you are. The urge to over-explain may still rise, but you no longer confuse that urge with obligation. You notice it, breathe, and choose differently. There is a quiet grief here. Grief for the self that adapted so well it disappeared. Grief for how long it took to see the pattern. But grief, unlike blame, moves. It does not loop endlessly. It opens space. You may never fully forget the role, but you no longer live inside it. And in that distance, fragile, imperfect, real you begin to experience something unfamiliar and deeply human, being present without preparing for punishment. The echo remains, but it no longer defines the room.